Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You're tuned in to compose your travel images like a Nat Geo Pro. I'd like to welcome the wonderful Dotan and Gail back to the program. And if you guys have not gotten caught up on this series, you should. It's been one of our best. And we'll drop the links into the chat on YouTube so you guys can get caught up with that. But Dotan, Gail, how we doing today?
We're
Great.
doing great. Thank you for having us again, Derek.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure having you guys on. I can't get out of here quick enough when I know you guys are on because, again, it's one of the rare times I get to just sit back, coast, be a viewer, soak in the information with everybody else. I will remind you all to get your questions in as Dotan and Gail will be handling those at the end of the program today. But guys, I'll turn it over to you and I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
All right, that sounds great. Well, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen right now and set up a couple of things, and then we will. Oh, Gail is already sharing the screen, sharing the mouse. And can you see my screen? Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, this is going to be about composition today, and this is a very exciting. It's been a very exciting series. I've really been enjoying presenting these with Gail for the past couple, and as Derek said, you should definitely catch up on the last two because they were, I think that they'll be very informative and complement this one. But composition is a topic that I know is dear to a lot of people, so I'm excited to present this today with Gail. And talking about Gail, she will give us a little bit of her background.
Okay, let's see here. Here I am. Hi, my name is Gail Fisher, and I've worked at the Los Angeles Times for 20 some years as a staff photojournalist and a staff editor, where I traveled extensively throughout the world covering social issues and geopolitical issues. And then I decided to transition into magazines, where I worked at National Geographic Magazine as a senior photo editor. And I was so fortunate to have the opportunity to work with some of the most talented photographers in the world. And I'd like to share some of that insight with you today. Okay, back to you, Dotan.
All right. Let me see. For those who don't know me, my name is Dotan Saguy. I'm a street and documentary photographer based in LA, and I'm author of 3 photo books, one of which just came out. Last one is Dogtown, with German publisher Kara Verlag. I actually have a show, an exhibit opening on Saturday. So for those who are in LA, please look it up. It's at Venice Arts on Saturday. And I am a teacher as well. I love teaching photography. I've taught many courses and done talks and led workshops with Leica Academy and others. And now I teach workshops with Gail under Storyteller Workshops. We'll talk to you more about that and the opportunities that are coming up. But in the meantime, we will go straight in and talk about the agenda while we look at this beautiful photo from Gail. So today, about composition, first, what's the point? Why do we even compose? Why not just point your camera in the direction of what you want to photograph and just snap a picture? So what's the point of actually composing? We'll be covering that. Next, we'll talk about why it's always good to get it right in camera, because today, tools are amazing, especially the past couple of years, the advances in technology in terms of editing photography have been just staggering. You can use AI now to remove things from the background. You can do all kinds of things. So why is it still important to get it right in camera? Next, we'll talk about what we call the best kept secrets of composition. I think composition is always taught, with rules and without much explanation as to why those rules are there and what are the principles that are much more important than the rules. So we'll be talking about those secrets that nobody else talks about. Next, we'll talk about basic composition techniques, so much more in the mainstream of what you would be learning on YouTube and so on, rule of thirds and whatnot, but those are important to know, so we'll be covering those. perspective is not always talked about in terms of composition, and you can achieve different perspectives based on the focal length that you're using. So we'll look at how different focal lengths affect the perspective and help with composition. Another aspect that's not often talked about in compositions is color and composing for color versus composing for black and white. And so we'll talk a little bit about the differences and how to make good use of color when you use color. And then we'll finish with some advanced composition techniques for people who really want to push their composition skills to the next level. So this is a really full agenda. We're going to jump right in because there's a lot to talk about. And we'll start with what's the point of composition anyway? Why should you compose your pictures? And I would say, I think most people listening here probably would think of aesthetic, like you just want the images to look nice and have visual impact, on the viewer, which is, I think, a perfectly reasonable reason for using composition. But there's other things. I think, with composition, you really can affirm your own creativity and your own style with basically opting for choices, because we'll see it's all about decision making. And, you can make decisions that kind of send you down a path of composition that create a style for yourself. So I think that's a really important point of composition. And then ultimately, composition is a way for us photographers to tell stories. The way that you arrange things in your frame end up being the way that you communicate with the viewer what you want them to take away from your photograph. So you're basically telling stories with your composition.
So these are a few images from a small village in West Sumatra. Farming's important, especially rice farming. So I want to show you a short narrative in a few slides using some storytelling tools. Capturing storytelling is all about transforming your images into a narrative experience and evoking some kind of response with your viewer. To create this narrative, you need to understand your subject. You need to do your research. And these images show the hardship of farming in a developing country without the machinery automation. And there's several techniques to guide the viewer's eye. In this frame, leading lines is one of the most effective techniques. Check out these lines. They lead you to the people walking up the road, which gives scale to this place and a sense of place. And context is the information that surrounds the subject. We form our understanding from what we see. It's the framework, it's the surroundings. And I wanted to show how hard this work is. And this image adds to the narrative, but it really doesn't give you enough context. Whereas in this image, it provides much more context, and it shapes your understanding about what this village is all about. Creating atmosphere in your images can be done in a variety of ways. For me, one of the most important elements is the right light. Doing documentary travel photography, I try to avoid midday harsh light at all costs. I shoot early in the morning and late in the evening as much as possible. Slow shutter speeds help to add intrigue to these images, and I use slow shutter speeds a lot. The subtle smoke you see coming from the food stalls adds to the atmosphere, and it also helps to add another dimension to the scene of the narrative. Okay, Dotan, to you. Oh,
Nope,
I guess
still
it's
on.
not.
Yep.
I guess it's not to you. Yeah, so I want to discuss some of the most important mistakes that we find in our photography workshops. These mistakes have an impact on the composition. And like in this image, I wanted to document these majestic pyramids in Cairo, but I wasn't close enough. And too many people rely on cropping in the frame, too many in post and not in the frame. And they don't move closer to the situation. It's all about composition and filling your frame before you take the photograph. As I'm exploring a new area, I'll shoot a frame or two like this, and then I move in and I think about my composition. This image I took in San Sebastian in northern Spain, but there's way too much negative space and it lacks composition and impact. So I moved closer and I changed my angle and it improved the composition. So I also used a wide aperture because I wanted everything in focus. And another common mistake we find is not composing in the camera, and looking at your background critically and separating the subjects from the background. By changing your angle and getting low and moving slightly, these issues can be fixed before clicking the shutter. And cropping in post, as you all know, reduces the number of pixels significantly. And cropping this image makes it only slightly better because a lower angle would give the subjects much more separation from the background and increase the shadows in the foreground, giving it much more interest. And it would also take distracting objects out of the frame, which would disappear if I had executed it properly. So you have choices, and it's all about problem solving and making those decisions. Not having separation is another common mistake, and we all make them. But there's usually a solution. This is at the Guggenheim in Bilbao, northern Spain. And the light was average at best. And so I decided to take a few frames and then go into the museum and then come out later and see if the situation had improved. So I came out and the light was definitely better, but the background hadn't changed. And I couldn't find an angle to make it better. So I got it at a low angle and I solved the separation issues from all the clutter in the background. And this photo was taken in Paris during our workshop 2024. And we're always out in the field with our participants offering guidance. And this is when I took this image. Visual hierarchy is when an element in your frame stands out and attracts your attention, suggesting importance within the frame. In this particular image, there's so much going on. There's a lot of patterns and textures and colors. So it was really a challenge to figure out how am I going to shoot this and get visual hierarchy. But with the right framing and establishing some leading lines that lead your eye to the face on the wall, and then you go down to the subject, which is the shop owner, it was possible. Now it's to you, Dotan.
Yeah, so this brings me way back. This is one of the first shots I made in Venice back when I started photographing there about 10 years ago. At the time I was shooting in color, and I was just mesmerized by just the abundance of color and just everything, all the motion and everything going on. But I really wanted this shot to be about that little girl in pink in the, middle right of the picture. The problem is it's it's a little bit too loose of a frame. There are a few elements that just, aren't helping the frame, like the guy in the t-shirt with the backpack, the white t-shirt and the backpack on all the way to the left. There's a house all the way to the top right that also is bright and kind of distracts and makes your eye want to go off the frame there. So ideally, what I wanted to grab, the scene I wanted to document was this. But you know, I've been using just half the pixels in my camera, and I really should have been closer. So this is a much, you know, this is much more about this little girl and less about the sky and other distracting elements. So you know, it's really, this is something that you know, yeah, you can fix that kind of picture in post, but you know, really you should be getting it right in camera. And that's what we teach a lot of that when people come to our workshops. Where it's the amazing difference between beginning of the week and end of the week on a workshop like this. And if you look at painters, you know, through the ages, Bruegel, for example, I grew up with this a copy of this famous painting in my parents' living room. And I was always mesmerized by the composition of this. But, you know, imagine if the painter had painted this and decided, no, actually, you know, this is what I wanted to paint. It doesn't happen that way. Obviously, a painting takes a lot longer than a photo to make, but I think we should think like artists. We really should compose like artists. And our canvas is the viewfinder. It's not, you know, Lightroom or Photoshop. And even if you use Photoshop, you know, you can crop a frame, but Photoshopping has consequences. This image, for example, which, you know, is from the drum circle at Venice Beach, has a lot of imperfections in it. For one, you can see a face growing out of the back of this woman in the out to the left. And you know, there's other overlaps and things that I would have preferred to avoid. Obviously, there's a very dynamic, fluid scene where, you know, things move very quickly, so it's hard to separate. But if I were to remove that face from her back and you know, deal with a little bit of other you know, imperfections in this picture by removing them in Photoshop or asking some AI algorithm to remove them, then the photo is no longer a documentary or photo or a street photography image. It is demoted to essentially what people call fine art as a catch-all for basically saying there's nothing wrong with fine art photography. It's just that there are no rules for editing, processing fine art photography. You can do composites, you can do all kinds of things, but all of a sudden it's no longer reality. It loses the sense of this is what actually happened. So you know, in those cases, you know, this is another case of this where, you know, there's some imperfections in this picture in terms of overlaps of characters and you know, things that are not properly separated. But these are both such strong images that you know, I over the years I've kept in my portfolio because I think they're strong enough to stay there even with all these imperfections. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is, you know, try to shoot your images perfectly with perfect composition, but when they're strong enough to carry a few imperfections in them, and they're strong despite those imperfections, just embrace it and you know, wear it like a badge of honor, because we're in an age where more and more images are going to be starting to be generated by AI, and they'll look perfect, but they won't be real, they won't have soul like real images like this. And this is another image where, you know, like at the elbow and you know, the person behind the dress, you know, not perfect positioning, not perfect separation here, but the moment is good enough, and for me to keep this photo as part of my portfolio. And so anyway, in the age of AI, I just, you know, wear this like a badge of honor, that there's imperfections and it shows that my images are real and they document real events. I still try to get them perfect, you know, when I shoot them, but you know, there's no point, I think, removing these things, because then you're no longer documenting reality.
Before composing, I walk around and I'm thinking, okay, what are the distracting things in the background, like that pole in the middle of the frame? Can I get close and personal? Should I shoot with a wide angle or a telephoto? In this situation, I was shooting with two camera bodies. I was shooting with a wide angle and a 80 to 200. I like zoom lenses, but I learned to shoot on fixed lenses. I shot with fixed lenses for years and years, and it really made me disciplined. And I'm glad I had that opportunity. So just a suggestion, if you're just starting out, I stick with fixed lenses until you feel like you've mastered them. So what should be in? I was looking for interesting faces. I wanted more than one face in focus, but I wanted a central point for you to look at. So I used a longer lens with a shallow depth of field so that this subject would stand out. But what should be out? Well, this was early in the shoot, and I was trying to get up close and personal with a wide angle, but it didn't work. As you look around the faces, oh my gosh, there's like 4 or 5 people looking at me. And so that wasn't working because I didn't want my presence in the photograph. And the ground's distracting there as well. So again, using a shallower depth of field, my subject stood out against the blurred background, and I was able to exclude what I didn't want in the frame. And there's different techniques to show what's important in the frame. Again, I love to shoot low light, evening, slow shutter speeds. And this creates a nice different kind of atmosphere. Here I was waiting for the smoke to help isolate my subjects. And as it covered most of the subjects, you see this one subject sharp in focus. And I was able to frame it like this because I was on the ground, literally just sitting on the ground next to him. And luckily they didn't respond to me and I could be a fly on the wall. Okay.
So, yeah, it's important to have, so we'll be talking a little bit on the slide about psychology and this is what I was talking about in the introduction when I was saying that we're taking composition a little bit in a contrarian way. It's not just about rules, but it's about understanding why the rules are there. What this slide is specifically on that. People's eyes. So there's different things that we've evolved with, and that kind of dictate how people read images. And I think it's important to understand that so that you can shoot them in a way that people can understand your images better and appreciate them better. So one really important guideline is that people's eyes go to what's bright in your frame. If there's one bright thing in your frame, the eyes will go there first. So this is actually a case where it was difficult to do that because unless I framed it even tighter, which I didn't want to because I wanted that whole composition with all the dresses and all the colors, I had the white shirts at the top that would take the eye right off the frame and away from the subject that I wanted people to focus on. So in this case, I actually corrected this slightly by toning the whites down in post, which is actually perfectly acceptable for photojournalism and documentary. So it does not, that kind of change does not demote your image to fine art. It keeps it as a documentary image. But in this case, it really helps getting the eye to that little girl in the center left. Another thing that we've kind of evolved to do is that our eyes demand separation. And that's why, as photographers, our biggest task when it comes to problem solving in composition is to make order out of chaos, and separating is part of that. Visual hierarchy, Gail touched upon that earlier. It's a kind of like, if you look at a map somewhere in a city that you don't know, and there's this, arrow pointing and say, you are here. It's kind of the same thing with a photograph, except you don't get to put an arrow on it, but you want the photograph to be clear enough that people know where to look first. And if you can, this image, I think, achieves that. It's even better if you can have sort of a map for them to follow, where you say, it's almost like if you said, look here first, then here, then here. And in this case, I make the connection between 3 different elements in the image, and it helps the user, the viewer's eye navigate the image in a very pleasant way. And in the end, they also get a sense of satisfaction that they've solved the puzzle, which is really it's a, you give them sort of a high from that. Another thing that we've evolved with is we love figure to ground. Figure to ground is a technical photo term for it's just plain language is, your subject being popping on the background, basically having a high contrast between your subject and its background. So this is always, here this photo actually uses also that the eyes go to what's bright. It uses a frame within the frame, which we'll cover later. So there's different techniques that I used here to really attract the attention to my subject and create a pleasing experience for the viewer. But the point of this whole thing is you need to have your viewer in mind and their psychology to compose to their liking, and that's really the essence of what I'm trying to convey here. And on the contrary, if the eyes don't have something to latch on, if there's no clear hierarchy, if you haven't made order out of chaos, it's not as pleasant to look at, and people get tired of it quickly and they just move on to the next thing. So you really kind of need to give them that visual hierarchy and just give the eyes what they want, basically is the point here. And this leads to okay, so now that we understand the psychology of how people look at an image, let's think of the tools that we have to give them what they want. And one tool that we have is we get to decide with our viewfinder and our feed and everything what to include and what to exclude. In this case, this was in the Loire Valley in France, and I really wanted to bring the viewers' attention to the grapes in the buckets and the people carrying the buckets, just the hands carrying the buckets. And I wanted to make a point with the pattern of buckets going all the way back to the background. So I decided to exclude the faces and the feet. And, so there's a conscious decision in framing this image of exactly what it wanted to convey to the viewer. This is again understanding what the viewer's eyes want. You give them separation, you give them figure to ground that we talked about, making your subject pop on the background, making them look where it's bright. So again, there's multiple of these things that are happening here to create a pleasing viewing experience for the viewer. And it's all about your problem-solving skills. This was a scene in the same, same part of the same series in the Loire Valley, documenting wine production and natural wine production in this case. And they were throwing buckets from the top of this whatever they were on, and those big buckets that the grapes had been carried in were being stacked on the left here. And so this was a pretty difficult scene to shoot because one, it was a very messy environment and with lots of clutter, and I wanted to hide things that to simplify the scene. So I kind of hid a bunch of stuff behind the guy receiving the buckets. There's also very low light. It's also very high speed because they were tossing those buckets. And so there were many decisions to be made, but compositionally it was challenging. I had to be, the camera was basically to the ground. I actually had the camera sitting on the ground, and to be able to get both characters, the person throwing and the person receiving, as well as the bucket in the same frame. Luckily, in scenes like this, you can see there's a bunch of buckets already stacked up. So the guy had already, I had already tried a bunch of stuff that hadn't worked, and I was correcting each time to try and get the right shot. So I ended up getting it, a few buckets in. And of course, for all these things, you use your feet and the position of your camera. That's really one of the main decisions you need to make. And Gail was talking about zooms and how it's sometimes counterproductive. I think nowadays, when you get your first camera with a kit zoom, you feel like the zoom is a way to just move, closer or farther from the image. But really, that doesn't help your composition. It's really your feet that should be doing that work, because your positioning is really key. And the angle of view is also really key. So it really does you, I think, a disservice to start with a zoom. As a beginner, I would definitely have people start with a prime lens. And actually on workshops, often I ask people to tape their zoom to whatever focal length they want to get a good feel for. And of course, your patience then is the key to capturing those peak moments. So once you have that right angle of view and you've positioned yourself properly, it's a matter of waiting for those peak moments and making sure the faces are visible, that they're not being obstructed by too many arms in this case, and you're so that you get a sense of the festivity going on here.
So the rule of thirds is one of the most fundamental principles in photography, as you all know. It's a composition guideline that places your subject in the right or left third of an image, leaving the other two thirds open, like in this image. Your photo becomes more balanced and dynamic. This image that I took in Burma, your eye goes directly to the child's face, which I consciously placed in this part of the frame when I shot the image. The rule of space is when you create visual balance by adding space in front of the direction that the person's looking or the subject might be moving or running. Basically, it gives them space to look into. And I shot this image in New Zealand. Leading lines direct the viewer's eye from one part of the composition to another. In this image, the lines start at the bottom of the frame, and then it guides your eye to the hikers, to the middle of the frame, and then to the background. Vertical lines are often used with tall buildings or tall trees to convey a sense of power and strength and to give it scale. And it also creates an illusion sometimes that it's bigger and taller than it really is. This is an image that I shot in Hong Kong. It's symmetrical and balanced with the two trees and the lone figure. And to achieve this, I'm literally sitting on the ground shooting upwards with a very low angle to achieve this perspective.
We're talking about a few obvious composition techniques, so the basic composition techniques. Do you need me to?
Let's see here. I'm sorry. I think what happened here is oh yeah, here we go. Okay. Patterns. I love shooting patterns. These elements in a scene that repeat themselves in a predictable way. They're commonly seen with shapes and colors and textures, and they're all around us. They're in nature, they're in cities, they're architecture, and beach scenes, like this scene in San Sebastian in northern Spain. This has a lot of balanced components, the symmetry, and then the leading lines and the curved lines. And negative space. I really enjoy working with negative space. And this was my lucky day. The beach was empty and storm clouds were moving in, which made for really dramatic light. Negative space emphasizes not just what the subject is, but the empty space around it. And in this case, the figure is a shadow, the lamppost, and your eye goes to the mural and then the chairs that are all buttoned down for the upcoming storm. And this was the same beach that I shot earlier, but later in the afternoon, the storm clouds had moved in and the light was much more interesting. And to give your image scale, a person is a useful point of reference for size, especially when photographing large objects like this massive stone facade in Egypt. This is the Temple of Ramses II near the Sudan border. Without these two small figures in the doorway, you would not understand the size of the temple. And Egypt is one of my favorite places to shoot. I find it fascinating. It's so full of history. And this image is from low tide in Homer, Alaska. It's an example of middle horizon lines. In the foreground, you see patterns of the tidal ebb and flow, which are reflected with the orange glow from the setting sun. And in the middle ground, that's actually a layer of sand. If you don't look closely, you might not realize that's sand. And these two almost identical halves of the image are equal in balance and proportion and actually importance. And I executed this with intent, and the results were much more bold and intense. Iliana volcano is in the background, way in the distance, but it gives this image some focal point and scale. And I'd never experienced this kind of intense orange light on the horizon with this purple glow. It was unreal. And then later that night, for the first time in a long time, we had northern lights in Homer, which is very unusual because it's so far south on the coast. This image was taken in the Grand Canyon in Yellowstone National Park, and it's an example of using a wide angle lens, getting close with a low angle, and then bringing your subject in large in the foreground. And I was drawn to these pine needles, this little bit of life, trying to survive against the sandy, eroded cliffs. So I wanted to emphasize it in the foreground. I got down really low, and this was not a real safe position to be shooting in. In providing the sense of depth, using a wide angle can do this. You couldn't get this shot, the same perspective with the telephoto lens. I was shooting low on the ground rather than at eye level, and the hanging ice that formed in the cave, the person gave it scale, the soft winter light, and shooting within the cave framed it. And then you see the curve of the landscape, and all these elements contributed to the perspective of providing a sense of depth. Shooting a wide angle can create an intimacy in your photography that often doesn't happen with the telephoto lens. You're shooting from the inside, not outside shooting in, like I like to describe it. You're connected with your subject and they've let you in, and this works only if you're invisible. And this way you can capture genuine moments if they're not responding to you. Layering is ideal when you're using a wide angle lens. It doesn't happen with the telephoto. It's using multiple points of interest and placing people on different planes within the foreground and in the middle and in the background, like you see these three figures here. And there needs to be some kind of interaction with the scene unfolding. And the more complex it is, the more interesting it is. Layering can also tell a story within a single frame. And Dotan, he really excels in this area, mainly using a fixed 35 millimeter lens, and I'm sure he'll discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah, actually, so this image is one of the first ones that I started when I started doing Venice in black and white. This is again about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And at the time I was shooting a 50 millimeter. And I think the reason why I quickly after that moved to a 35 was that I desperately wanted to layer scenes, but the 50 was so challenging to layer with. And the 35 was so much easier and natural for layering that, and layering is so dear to my way of composing that that's why I've been shooting 35 ever since. But this was shot with a 50, and it's natural. It's a natural perspective to the eye. It's 50 millimeter. I think maybe 45 millimeter is how our eyes actually see the world. So when you shoot a 50, it does show people something very familiar. And, Cartier-Bresson, for example, shot with a 50 his whole career pretty much. And yeah, and his picture have this kind of natural feel to them. It does also help providing a good balance between foreground and background. So it enables you to do those juxtapositions that, it's actually ideal for those kinds of juxtapositions. Had I shot this with a 35, probably the guys in the background would have seemed too far and too small in the picture to be noticed. And they kind of make this picture. So really this was, one that needed to be shot on a 50. It also allowed me to, get close and get a feel of intimacy because I'm close enough to them, but without being like in their face like I would have been with a wider lens. So it really helps with that. So it really, I mean, a 50 is great walk around lens for, I would say if you're starting and you're afraid of getting too close to subjects, the 50 is a really good trade-off because it allows you to get those scenes, but without getting too close. I would recommend starting with that before going to something wider.
To capture this fog drifting over the hills in Montana at Yellowstone National Park, I used a 100 to 400 telephoto lens. And here you can see it flattened the perspective so that the foreground and the middle and the background all appear to be closer together. I could not have created this layered, compressed image with a wide angle. So in this case, you really need a telephoto. And in this image, I wanted to isolate the subject in sharp focus as he flew over the waves, wakeboarding in Ketchikan Bay. Using my 80 to 200, I wanted a shallow depth of field, and I didn't want the mountains in the background to be distracting. This subject separation technique is often used in sports photography. And because telephoto lenses have such a narrow field of view, they can also be used for portrait photography or capturing tender moments, like in this situation in Israel, where I was on assignment. It wasn't appropriate for me to be on top of them with a wide angle lens. I needed to give them space and capture the special moment without being a distraction. So using the telephoto lens here really helped the situation. And in this emotional situation, I wanted to give these grieving women space without invading their privacy. Again, using a telephoto with a shallow depth of field, I was able to isolate this one woman on the right and capture an emotional moment. And I couldn't have achieved this perspective with a wide angle. And then I would have also been really in their space. And I could spend an entire hour talking about wildlife photography and working with National Geographic photographers on various wildlife stories. There's an incredible amount of research that goes into studying the animals, the different lenses they use, setting up camera traps and blinds to observe and photograph the animal behavior. I'm not a wildlife photographer by any means. But I have fun with it. And normally I use like a 100 to 400 when I'm out hiking. And like I did here, and carrying around a 20-pound 600 lens with a tripod or monopod, hiking, that just wouldn't be any fun. I actually shot this image from the deck at Odyssey Lodge in Homer, Alaska. It was possible to stay safe in this situation and photograph the bear. And we're most likely going to be offering workshops in 2025 in Alaska. Wonderful wildlife photography to shoot from eagles are abundant and bear sightings aren't unusual, orca whales in the bay. And anyways, it's just such a beautiful and wild place to shoot wildlife and nature and even landscapes.
Yeah, I look forward to that because I think there's a mix, especially in Homer, of you can do some street and documentary photography, but you can do wildlife and you can do landscape, and so it will be fun to have workshops there. Black and white or color. This is often this is a big decision people have to make typically, and it is part of composition. So this is actually in Cuba, and you know obviously this photo would not be what it is in black and white. And I shot this whole project in color, and I'll explain why in a second. But you know this is a broken down red car with a horse and carriage. This is which is red, and then this pregnant lady walking through with her red dress, so and red shoes. Anyway, it only works because it's a color photograph, obviously. So one thing I ask myself before starting a project is color important to the information? I don't default to color. I'm actually more of a black and white default kind of guy. But in this case, color was so important, it had to, you know, take the front seat. So you have to figure out which is the best fit for your subject matter. Sometimes when I want to photograph Venice Beach, I want it to look timeless, and that timeless look in Venice to me is black and white. You know, this is how I convey it. But for Cuba, which I also wanted to render timeless, you don't need to make that effort because Cuba is timeless because of the cars and all the just people, the clothing, everything makes it look timeless to start with, and the color is so important to the subject matter that you know I just went with color. Again, another photograph, you know, from Cuba that you know wouldn't work in black and white nearly as well as it does in color. So the advice I would give though is if you're just shooting one-off photos where you know you're not really shooting a whole project, it's okay to decide in post if you want something in black and white or color, but it's much better to shoot with the intention of shooting color or black and white, even in that case, because you make your composition decisions much better if you know what you're going for. If you're going for the color or you're going for high contrast black and white, you would shoot differently. So I really encourage people to shoot to have that make that conscious decision beforehand, even if their camera is a color camera that they intend to convert to black and white. The other thing is if you're shooting a whole project, and which was the case for me there, it's very hard to publish color and black and white side by side. You know, if you have one shot in color, one shot in black and white, the next one is color, occasional ones are black and white. That doesn't work for, you know, publishing a book or publishing images in a magazine or even publishing for your own, you know, photo album. They don't mix very well. So, and doing it tastefully is almost impossible. So I would highly recommend making a conscious decision about what, you know, and sticking to one or the other when you're shooting a project.
So this is another topic that we could spend a lot of time talking about. Color's a tool, it's complicated, and when you're shooting color, you constantly need to be aware of the color in your frame, if it works or if it doesn't, and having that understanding is crucial. There's certain emotions that are associated with color, such as green. We associate that with nature and life. Blue, we associate with sky and water and peaceful, et cetera, et cetera. And red, like in this photo that I shot in Paris at our workshop in 2024, it evokes passion and excitement. And in this case, it works because the subject is dressed in red and it's not a red distracting object in the background. Cool colors, blues, green, violet, they're subtle and they tend to fade into the background. I was on a boat and oh gosh, it got up before dawn and we were cruising up the Nile to this Nubian village. And this hillside was in shade. So, of course, it was surrounded by cool colors. On the way back, it was actually getting into the evening hour, and this same hillside is covered in sun and it lights up the sand with a warm yellow hue. So you can see the difference here between the cool color and the warm color. And muted colors are soft and subdued, and they produce emotional calm, like associated with this photo. And they're effective in landscapes. They allow you to focus and shift your composition and shift your eyes to this composition. And normally, I would not shoot a street art scene mural, just the mural itself. I would be patiently waiting for something or something to happen within the frame. But this color was so vivid on this street art in Barcelona that I felt it could stand on its own. And I would describe vivid as saturated color, almost neon, strong, bright, bold colors. And these colors make a statement. And luckily, the background is this subtle, warm hue color, and it frames the figures and it allows the color to show the symbolism in this and evoke a response to the viewer. And color harmony. Color harmony is a combination of warm and cool colors, like in this photograph shot during the carnival in Rio de Janeiro. These colors complement each other. The warm shades of the reds and oranges and yellows, they evoke, to me, excitement and energy, and contrasted with the cool colors of the purples and the blues and the greens. Complementary colors like this are opposite of each other on the color wheel. Blue is complementary to orange, and purple complementary to yellow. Red is complementary to green. And when these colors are used together, they can draw attention to the focal point in the image. Here in this photo, your eye goes directly to the red surrounded by the green grass. And last but not least, analogous colors. And they're the colors that are adjacent to each other on the color wheel. And we often use these to create aesthetically pleasing images, since the colors complement each other and they just blend so nicely. In this photo, I shot at twilight in Albania. The blues and purples and the fading light, to me, this creates a harmonious atmosphere. And so many people stop shooting as soon as the sun sets. But if you're patient, there's sometimes beautiful light like this. Okay, the time.
All right, let's go into the advanced composition techniques. So I just want to share like a few just real quick. This could be a series of lectures on this. So this will be, it probably won't do it justice, but it will give you a sense of how you can up your game in terms of composition. Diagonal lines in this picture, you would think it's just that diagonal rope that goes from one end to the other, but there's lots and lots of diagonals in here, including if you look at people's arms and the kind of all the triangles that are going on in there. That are all over the image. So that's when you see a diagonal line, for me it's an immediate trigger to shoot, because it gives it a sense of dynamism, and it just it makes for really cool composition elements. Layering, we talked about it. I love doing it. Could be doing it every single shot almost. It gets a little repetitive maybe, but I don't get tired of it. And this is one example of, again, in Venice Beach. This is around the drum circle. People were playing with hula hoops, and foreground, middle ground, background, all kinds of layers in between. The key is separation. You really, really, really need to separate your layers for it to be properly layered. Juxtapositions, make them obvious. When I think the main mistake people make on juxtapositions is, it hits them in the face when they see it, like it seems obvious, but to a viewer who doesn't have the context, if that viewer cannot understand why it's a juxtaposition immediately, then it's not a good juxtaposition. So it's that's the trick of juxtapositions. Rule of odds, for some reason, against probably some kind of evolutionary psychology thing, we respond better when there's 1, 3, 5, etc. Subjects in a photograph, and not 2, 4, 6, and so on. So, if you see 3 people, and that's the most common, this is 5, so this is kind of pushing it, but usually 3 people instead of 4. So you can always crop the 4th one out if you see 4, and if that person is not essential, but it's better when it's an odd number of subjects. Frame within the frame, we talked about it a little bit, but it's always works. Lots of Nat Geo photographers actually use this day in, day out. And yeah, it's always, and the nice thing is you get multiple frames, so it's like having multiple pictures in one image, and it's very satisfying that way. Okay, this is like next level. I actually spoke more about this in a older B&H presentation I gave, but golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence, that's one of the things I love to find in my images and look for when I'm out shooting. It takes a lot of practice. Look it up. I would say just Google it, and this is a whole rabbit hole of composition that you can fall into that is fascinating. Cartier-Bresson was known for having, a golden ratio almost in every single picture, and was, really good at just finding it in the wild. So invite you to explore that further. So with that exploration and another invitation to explore further, don't, by the way, we're going to give you a little bit of there's going to be a little bit of presentation on how you can join us on those workshops, but don't go anywhere. First, because this is a really good opportunity, but second, because we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A after that. So don't go anywhere. The so we conduct workshops in Paris. We're going to have one in Provence very soon. I'm going to talk about. We're going to have some in Alaska. We might have some in Cuba. So just stay tuned as to what we're offering on our website. But we always stay with our students the whole workshop. So we're not the kind of people who send people out to shoot and then review their pictures later that evening. We don't do that. We're with you the whole day from beginning to end, and we give you tips on the ground as you shoot. We stay in really nice hotels. We have great cultural immersion. I grew up in France, so I love introducing people to that culture. We provide access to places that people don't typically know about, and we have friends everywhere there, and we can connect you and introduce you to places that you wouldn't otherwise see. Local cuisine is a big thing for me. I love cooking, and I love sharing my love for cuisine. So we usually select restaurants that are phenomenal. And one of the things you get to do on our workshops that I don't know that anybody else is offering is you make your own photo book at the end of the workshop. So Gail is an absolute master at sequencing and editing down your photos, and so that goes a long way. And I can help you also lay them out and everything. And everybody goes home with a laid out photo book that they can then print for their family, their friends, and maybe make a book dummy or something for publishing. So that's one of the things that people love most about our workshop. And getting published is also part of it. I mean, we have a blog that you can get published on after the workshops if you wish to. So one of the examples of where you can join us is we have this Provence workshop in Provence, France, in the south of France, just in a couple of months now, October 27th through November 4th. There's only a couple of spots left at this point. It's limited to 10 people total, but there's only a couple of spots left. So if you are interested, don't think about it too long. It's going to be an all-inclusive workshop as always. It's really like time travel. This is the kind of village that we're going to explore. And again, there's a curated set of local restaurants. I personally vacationed as a kid, in that region because I grew up in France. I went to that region, a lot as a kid, and I continued going as an adult. So I know it quite well, and I know all the best spots there. So if you're joining us, you're going to be in for an amazing journey there, like you wouldn't be able to have on your own. And then we even offer an optional Paris Photo VIP tour, because when we come back from the workshop, it's actually the start of Paris Photo, which is the largest, most prestigious photo fair in the world, with lots of galleries are participating, and the most prestigious galleries, the most prestigious book publishers are going to be there. And I've been going for a number of years, and we'll give you a tour, and we'll have special access for the people who want to participate in that. It's an optional, obviously. So please do sign up to get notified about future trips. We have, you can go to our website at storyteller-workshops.com, and there there'll be a form to stay informed about. We don't send newsletters very often, only when we have workshops to announce. So you'll just be in the loop for that. And then you can always email us. If you want to reach Gail or myself, please do use this email address, storytellerworkshops@gmail.com. You can ask us any questions, even, things that weren't clear, or that you wanted more information about from our presentation, or future workshops, or any of that. Do not hesitate to reach us. And Derek, I think back to you at this point.
That was such a comprehensive guide to composition. I want to thank you guys both. We do have time for a couple questions. So I want to start it with a question that we had regarding, it's funny you mentioned Cartier-Bresson, the decisive moment versus composition. When you're out there, some of our viewers have pointed out things are happening so fast. What do you focus on first? We had a viewer said, sometimes I focus on the composition and I miss the action of the moment. Or, you miss that decisive moment because you're focusing on the composition. So number one, do you choose the decisive moment over the composition? Does it depend on the moment? And are there any tips for working both in?
Yeah, so when I teach street photography, there's actually a few different ways that I teach people how to look for interesting scenes. And this is something I taught a few times on B&H presentations. There's a 3F. I'm not going to go into the whole methodology, but one rule is you have to be ready with your camera settings, so that if there is some kind of moment that happens in front of you, just completely without any notice, that you're ready to at least snap a few frames and try to get something out of it. So that's, part of that is being ready, and having your camera settings set for the most likely situation to occur based on kind of your environment. But in my experience, that's actually kind of the rarer sort of occurrence. The most likely is that you're going to be finding a great composition with potential, and then it's all about framing it properly, really taking your time to get everything, to polish your composition, and sort of anticipate where that sort of cherry on top of the cake was going to appear. Where that moment is most likely to. It could be, interesting people passing through. It could be like, if you're near a skate park, there might be a skateboarder, it might pass through, and you want to be ready and kind of anticipate where the path of that skateboarder might be, so that it enters your composition exactly how you want it. That is called fishing. And Cartier-Bresson used to do a lot of fishing. That was his main tactic. You would find a scene and wait for the subject to enter it, and then grab it right, at that perfect moment, decisive moment, when the subject was in exactly the right spot. If you think about the cyclist photo that he, is so famous, it's probably his most famous photograph. That's how he took it. He saw that the guy was going around the block a few times, and he made his composition and anticipated for the cyclist to be in that right spot. So that's, I would say, that's probably your best shot. And when it's a repetitive thing like the cyclist, you get a few chances to try this out and polish your composition, and so on. So those are, I think, I hope that answers the question, but that's how I teach it anyway.
Wonderful. Gail, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just agree with everything that Dotan said. But one thing I want to mention is be ready, of course. And when I'm at our family lodge in Homer, Alaska, I always have the telephoto lens on the camera. And if I'm at the lodge, it's there. If I'm at my cabin, whatever, I'm just ready, because when you see wildlife, you have to just grab and shoot. You don't have time to find your lens, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it depends on the situation, but be ready.
Definitely. Good question here. I want to see where both you guys stand on this. Where do you draw the line on blurriness? Alan says, I see many photographs where subjects are out of focus. I usually reject them, but they seem to be okay with you. When and where do you draw the line on that? What is there kind of a barometer for, if the moment's there, if you have that serendipity, if you have the decisive moment, if you have the intent, are you allowed to blur the lines a little bit? Pun intended.
I think Gail and I might have different opinions on this, but I'll go first. And I think it's more about the soul of the picture and how it makes people feel than about perfection. And I don't look at pictures under a microscope. I don't, when I get a camera or a lens, I don't look at all the reviews to see how, you know, whether it's like the most perfect, clinical lens or whatever. It's really more about how the images make people feel. And at the end of the day, I mean, if you look at a lot of the humanist photographers, we talked about Cartier-Bresson and many other, and there's many others in the same, category or I don't know about the category, but like in that same genre, that if you look at their photographs, there's a lot of imperfections, both in terms of, things overlapping or how sharp it is or how sharp the subject is. But they're amazing photographs. And some are extremely grainy because they didn't have the technology that we have now for ISO, control, and it doesn't deter from those images being so impactful. So I really couldn't care less. I mean, obviously, if it hurts the image where the viewer doesn't um cannot connect with it as much anymore, then yes, that is a problem. So there's definitely a line, but for me, that it's not. It doesn't have to be perfect or tack sharp or this or that. But I think it's also what you shoot. I think that for street photography and documentary, it's one. I think what I'm saying is probably okay. But if you're shooting sports or if you're shooting landscape or if even wildlife and things like that, then there's a whole bunch of other standards. I think you really have to go tack sharp and you really have to pay a lot more. Or if it's studio photography or commercial, like then there's absolutely no room for error. It has to be tack sharp. It has to, the vignetting has to be really controlled. Like all these things have to be much, much, it's a different standard. So anyway, that was my my answer. Gail, what do you
Okay,
think?
well, yeah, I'll respond, especially since you qualified yourself. Um, yeah, for me, just with my journalistic background, working at the Times and Geographic, if something is front focused or back focused or out of focus, it wouldn't make it unless it's this incredible news situation that no one else has, that you got to get it out there. But
I'm thinking about the Normandy, the beach landing.
Robert Capa.
Yeah, Kappa's famous photograph, completely blurry, grainy, like just almost,
Well,
and still one of the
Great
most
example.
most important photographs of all time, right?
yeah,
So
yeah, okay, exactly. And that's what I was saying in terms of if it's some incredible news situation, then yeah.
It's not
So,
me on the corner of Broadway and Houston. Little different, and I've always found too, it's like sometimes you get a little soft focus, and for me, it's a lot more acceptable than when you completely miss focus and you have your subject is soft focus, but then you have something in the background that's completely sharp, and it's like, all right, well, now my eye's being completely taken away from
oh,
the
of course.
image, and that's
Yes.
exactly.
so it's yeah, I see both sides of the coin here. It's situational, like a lot of things where certain things won't fly. Centering an image. Sometimes centering an image is the right way to do it, and sometimes
Right.
it's not. Let's get one last question here. This is a specific question on one of the images shown here. Elizabeth is asking, when you talk about negative space, as you do with the picture of the sand with the shadow of the street lamp, is that your way of drawing in the eye versus just having the sand with no lamp?
Oh, well, without that lamp shadow or without some kind of subject, what's the point of the photograph? But when you look at that photograph and you see that sharp shadow of the lamp and then all that nice negative space around it, your eye first, anyways, my eye goes to the lamppost, and then it moves around to the negative space. The negative space allows your eye to then move to that mural on the wall, the face, and then from there it goes to the umbrellas. Everything in that photo, luckily, was so symmetrical and lined up, and I just got really lucky. And then on top of it, those storm clouds. So you really needed that negative space. And if you didn't have a subject within the negative space, it wouldn't have been an interesting photo. I think I showed one earlier from San Sebastian, that same beach where I was shooting the sandcastle. I walked up to it and there was all that negative space, and it wasn't a good photograph because in that situation, the negative space wasn't it wasn't didn't help the photograph at all. It wasn't executed properly. So there's the difference. I hope I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. It's, it's about that balance, and it's the word I'm looking for, like a reciprocal relationship between having an anchor, having a subject, having that almost like that sense of relief. That negative space provides breathing room. It provides relief for the subject, and it's like one needs the other as much as the other needs the one. So
Exactly.
that,
Yeah.
Complement each other.
yeah, definitely. I love having you guys on. We don't get enough street and documentary. We were talking in the green room about, streets. Like it's so popular, but just never. It's always like it's the stepchild that's in the corner and doesn't get the seat at the table as much. But it's always so interesting, really, just to see. I mean, you really, what you guys are doing is you're taking these everyday moments and you're seeing life in such a beautiful way, and it's real, and it's what we walk by every day. It's what we experience. It's not contrived. It's not, setting up and building a David LaChapelle 40-person set. And
Right.
it's really just seeing. I mean, you guys
Life.
it's life. You guys are really great at seeing the world. And I think that makes you appreciate every day, the days that you're walking without the camera, helping focus. I mean, it's clear in your images that you guys just see the world in a different way. And I think that's beautiful.
Well, thank you, Derek. We love you too.
We do.
Thank you. Thank you.
We love being on here.
No, love having you guys on. Again, we did drop the links to this series, and if you just go on, like you guys have been on here on the platform before, we may not have everything uploaded to this channel. Again, we've only had this channel up and going about a year, but there's definitely more from you guys to come. Definitely check out the links. We do love when people support our speakers. So if you guys are really looking to take your work to the next level, I say this all the time, and this is unsolicited. You really have to invest in yourself. We always invest in the gear, but you have to invest in yourself. You have to going on YouTube is great, and getting tutorials and doing workshops is great, but having that honed in personalized experience from people who have the experience and they have the knowledge and they're equally as invested in your success as you should be is really important. So I want to thank you guys again for all that you do and always coming on here. And to all of our viewers out there, we hope you enjoyed it. We hope you support them and check out some of their future workshops if you guys are in the market for that. And that's all I got for you for now. So a huge thank you to Dotan and Gail once again, to all of our viewers out there. Another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.